At precisely 2:14 in the morning, an automated alert shattered the silence inside the Oak Ridge High network operations room. Marcus Vance, a senior IT administrator with 12 years on the job, stared at a red flashing icon on his secondary monitor. System traffic outbound, 42 gigabytes, routed straight to an unidentified IP address based in an offshore server cluster. The source of the burst was not a compromised server or a malware infection on a staff PC. It came from 35 idle webcams sitting in locked, empty classrooms on the second floor. Those cameras belong to LearnVector, the revolutionary artificial intelligence platform installed across 12,000 public school districts. The sales pitch had been flawless, an intelligent tutor that adapted to every child's learning speed in real time. But as Marcus watched the data stream, the packet header revealed something terrifying. The system was not transmitting test scores or reading comprehension metrics. It was pushing raw, uncompressed high-definition video frames captured while the room lights were off, paired with ultra-sensitive ambient microphone logs recorded during after-school study sessions. Marcus hit record on his external drive, pulling down the raw traffic log before the automated session terminated. He ran a diagnostic query on the active IP string, only to find the domain was masked behind for layers of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. Why was a state-funded education tool sending raw classroom footage to an anonymous offshore database in the dead of night? He picked up his phone, dialing the district superintendent, but paused before hitting call. On his screen, a terminal prompt suddenly opened by itself. A command line executed, session purge initialized. In less than 6 seconds, the local log files vanished from his server drive, scrubbed remotely from the outside. Whoever was operating LearnVector on the other end was not just watching the kids, they were watching Marcus. To understand how LearnVector gained access to millions of American classrooms, you have to rewind 3 years, to the height of district funding crises. School boards across 30 states were drowning in budget deficits, struggling to keep qualified staff in core subjects. That was when LearnVector's charismatic CEO, Ethan Drake, stepped onto the stage at the National Education Summit in Chicago. Drake offered an irresistible deal, a fully autonomous AI tutor, powered by cutting-edge neural networks, completely free for public schools through a multi-million-dollar federal innovation grant. All the schools needed to supply was the hardware, standard Chromebooks and webcams. The software promised to eliminate reading gaps and standardized testing failures within 6 months. Board after board signed the contracts, blinded by the promise of free, state-of-the-art technology. By the winter of that year, LearnVector was running on over 4 million student devices nationwide. To teachers, it seemed like a miracle. Children sat in front of their screens, working through math problems while the interface dynamically adjusted difficulty. If a student paused on an algebra question, the system offered a step-by-step hint. If they sped through a reading passage, it served up harder vocabulary. But buried 30 pages deep inside the end-user license agreement, written in dense legal jargon that no school board attorney ever flagged, lay a hidden clause. LearnVector was not just observing academic performance. The software was granted permission to access ambient hardware sensors, full camera authority, low-level microphone control, and real-time keystroke tracking. The classroom was not just being digitized, it was being harvested under the guise of personalized learning. 3 days after the network purge at Oak Ridge High, Marcus Vance refused to drop the trail. He set up an isolated sandbox network in his basement, hooking a fresh Chromebook up to a dummy student profile. He launched LearnVector and started probing beneath the user interface. What he uncovered went far beyond basic telemetry. LearnVector was executing a process called biometric dynamic keystroke analysis. Every time a child typed an answer, the algorithm did not just record whether the answer was correct. It measured the pressure of their fingers on the keys, the exact millisecond delays between letters, and the frequency of backspaces. The AI was mapping cognitive load, emotional hesitation, and fatigue levels. Then Marcus looked at the camera feed process. The webcams were not merely recording video. They were executing real-time photoplethysmography, an advanced optical technique that detects subtle changes in skin microcoloration caused by blood flow. LearnVector was measuring the heart rate, pupil dilation, and microfacial twitches of 7-year-old children while they took spelling quizzes. Every flicker of frustration, every moment of anxiety, every split-second loss of focus was converted into a mathematical metric. Marcus watched in horror as the code categorized a 9-year-old user with real-time tags, defiant profile, attention deficit markers, high emotional volatility. This was not an educational tool. It was a high-frequency psychological profiling engine deployed against children who had no idea they were being diagnosed. Marcus knew he could not take this story to his supervisors. The district had just signed a 5-year renewal contract with LearnVector worth tens of millions. If he spoke up internally, the logs would disappear, and he would be terminated. He needed an ally with national reach. On a rainy Thursday night in downtown Seattle, Marcus pulled his car into a dimly lit underground parking garage. Sitting in the passenger seat of an unmarked sedan was Sarah Lynn, an investigative reporter known for breaking major big tech surveillance scandals. Marcus handed her an encrypted solid-state drive containing 60 gigabytes of extracted raw code, packet captures, and biometric telemetry logs. Sarah plugged the drive into her air-gapped laptop right there in the front seat. As the terminal screen filled with rolling text, Marcus pointed to specific lines of outbound code. He showed her how the data packets bypassed encrypted school firewalls using custom tunnel protocols disguised as system maintenance updates. Sarah scrolled through the raw data files until she hit a folder labeled Neural Profile Exports. Inside were detailed psychological index scores for over 200,000 students, organized by zip code, school district, and full government names. Sarah looked up from the screen, her face pale under the dashboard light. "Marcus," she whispered, "this isn't just internal analytics. This data is structured specifically for external sales formats." Who was Ethan Drake, the vision-driven founder behind LearnVector? To the tech press, he was an undeniable prodigy. A former Stanford researcher who dropped out at 21 to build software that could solve global education inequality. He graced magazine covers, stood on stage alongside former presidents, and raised $300 million from Silicon Valley's top venture funds. To public investors, Drake painted LearnVector as a non-profit mission disguised as a software firm. But behind closed doors at their Palo Alto headquarters, the corporate structure told a completely different story. Sarah Lynn's investigation uncovered a secret web of subsidiary companies linked directly to LearnVector's primary holding entity. One subsidiary in particular stood out, Aegis Predictive Metrics. Founded by Drake just 9 months after LearnVector's nationwide launch, Aegis did not build school software. It specialized in risk assessment modeling for private health insurers, commercial credit agencies, and juvenile security contractors. When Sarah cross-referenced executive names, she found that LearnVector's lead data architects were simultaneously listed as senior directors at Aegis. The golden boy of EdTech was running a dual operation. Using American classrooms as an unvetted laboratory to train commercial risk algorithms on the behavioral patterns of millions of children. To prove the connection between LearnVector and commercial data brokers, Sarah brought in Dr. Aries Thorne, a former NSA cryptographer turned cybersecurity researcher. Working out of a private laboratory in Austin, Texas, Dr. Thorne spent 3 weeks reverse engineering the core code of the software, a proprietary framework named Vector Engine. What Thorne found inside the source code shocked even his hardened technical team. Deep within the algorithmic pipeline was a hidden routine called Project Eyesight. It operated completely outside the standard user interface. Whenever a student opened a non-school website or typed in a search bar while LearnVector was active in the background, Project Eyesight triggered an automated snapshot. It captured screen activity, ambient room noise, and eye gaze tracking coordinates. But the most disturbing discovery was the algorithm's neural net classifier. It was trained to flag specific emotional states, resistance to authority, impulse control failures, and signs of domestic stress. Thorne extracted the code's outgoing webhooks. Every flag generated by a child was immediately assigned an internal metric called a life trajectory vulnerability score. This score was updated every 15 seconds during active screen usage, and then pushed to an external cloud database named Vault 7. A server infrastructure completely disconnected from the school district's secure network. The implications of the life trajectory vulnerability score were devastating. LearnVector was not merely measuring whether a child was struggling with fractions. It was actively assigning children permanent behavioral labels before they even reached puberty. If a child showed high hesitation patterns while taking a standardized test, the system marked them as anxiety-prone. If they looked away from the camera repeatedly during a lecture, they were flagged as sustained inattention risk. If their biometric keystrokes showed sudden bursts of force, they were categorized as aggression-inclined. These labels were not stored in school cumulative files where parents or guidance counselors could review or contest them. They were locked inside LearnVector's private cloud, attached to each student's permanent digital footprint, created through mandatory public school attendance. Worst of all, the system had no correction mechanism. A 10-year-old having a bad week due to a family crisis or lack of sleep would have their baseline behavioral score lowered instantly. That permanent mark followed them as they progressed from grade to grade, quietly influencing the RA's future instructional recommendations and automated behavioral flags without human oversight. To understand the real-world consequence of this invisible scoring system, Sarah Lynn tracked down a family in suburban Ohio. 15-year-old Maya had been an honor student at Oak Creek High, but over the course of 3 months, her parents noticed her growing increasingly quiet and distant. One Tuesday afternoon, Maya was called into the vice principal's office. Waiting inside was not just the administrator, but an unannounced student resource police officer. Maya was informed that LearnVector's automated security monitor had flagged her for suspicious behavioral changes based on her keystroke telemetry and facial focus metrics during morning classes. The algorithm had calculated an 87% probability that Maya was undergoing a mental breakdown or posed a disruption risk to the school. The evidence? The camera had registered an increase in pupil dilation and sustained downward eye gaze, combined with erratic typing speeds during an online history module. Maya's locker was searched, her personal bag confiscated, and her parents called in to answer questions about her personal life. No drugs, weapons, or contraband were ever found. Maya was simply grieving the quiet loss of her grandmother. But the AI had already branded her a security anomaly, turning her public school into a hostile interrogation chamber. While Maya's family struggled to deal with the fallout at school, Sarah Lynn followed the money trail from LearnVector's shadow server, Vault 7. By tracing corporate transaction receipts and domain transfers, she confirmed her worst suspicion. LearnVector was not just building psychological models. They were selling access to them. A network of third-party data brokers, including private underwriting firms, commercial marketing conglomerates, and private security contractors, were purchasing encrypted access keys to the Vault 7 cluster. Insurance companies were utilizing the aggregated behavioral health markers to calculate future healthcare premium risks for families based on their children's stress profiles. Private college recruitment agencies were buying access to high-focus scores to target elite applicants while quietly ignoring schools in low-income zip codes. Even private juvenile behavioral modification centers were receiving targeted lead generation reports, flag lists of children labeled as defiant profile by the LearnVector algorithm. The intimate mental and physical states of public school children were being bought and sold in an unregulated dark pool of corporate surveillance, netting LearnVector tens of millions of dollars in secondary revenue. As Sarah Lynn prepared to publish her investigative story for a major national news outlet, the pushback from LearnVector was swift and aggressive. High-powered corporate attorneys descended upon the publication's headquarters with emergency cease-and-desist orders. They argued that the extracted code and server logs were stolen trade secrets obtained through illegal computer intrusion. They threatened multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits that could bankrupt the news organization before the article ever saw the light of day. Simultaneously, pressure mounted on the whistleblower. Marcus Vance arrived home one evening to find his personal home network compromised. His home desktop had been remotely wiped clean, and a sleek black SUV was parked across the street from his driveway, engine idling, windows deeply tinted. Late that night, Marcus received an anonymous text message containing an aerial photo of his daughter's elementary school, accompanied by a single sentence: "Unverified disclosures carry serious consequences." The message was clear. LearnVector was not going to let a single IT administrator expose their multi-billion-dollar enterprise without a fight. Instead of backing down, Sarah Lynn and Marcus Vance took a calculated risk. Realizing that commercial news outlets were being stonewalled by legal threats, Sarah leaked the entire unredacted technical report to a member of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Technology and Privacy. Within 48 hours, the story hit the congressional record, making the findings immune to private legal injunctions. The public reaction was instant and explosive. Outraged parents, privacy advocates, and teachers flooded school board meetings across the country, demanding answers. A formal congressional subpoena was issued, ordering Ethan Drake to appear before a Senate committee to testify under oath regarding LearnVector's hidden data practices and offshore server transfers. Leaked internal executive emails surfaced on the same day. One message sent by Drake to his chief technology officer read, "The school boards care about test scores and low cost. They will never look at the packet headers. Keep the Volta 7 pipeline open." The public defense of an innocent educational nonprofit was completely shattered. The Senate hearing room was packed to capacity as Ethan Drake sat at the witness table, surrounded by his legal counsel. Under intense questioning from senators, Drake attempted to downplay the allegations, calling them gross misinterpretations of standard diagnostic telemetry. Then, a lead prosecutor played an audio file provided by Marcus Vance. It was a recording of an internal LearnVector engineering call, where developers openly discussed bypassing federal COPPA laws, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, by masking facial recognition files as system operational logs. Drake froze at the microphone. His polished corporate composure disintegrated in front of live news cameras. When pressed directly under oath about the offshore servers in the Cayman Islands, Drake repeatedly invoked his legal privilege against self-incrimination. By the end of the 3-hour hearing, the narrative was undeniable. LearnVector was not an educational pioneer. It was one of the largest illegal corporate surveillance operations ever executed on American soil. The fallout was catastrophic and immediate. Within 2 weeks of the Senate hearing, over 8,000 school districts terminated their contracts with LearnVector. Mass protests organized by parents disrupted state education departments from California to New York. The Federal Trade Commission launched a sweeping federal investigation into LearnVector and its corporate partners, issuing emergency asset freezes and court orders to seize their server infrastructure. At the Palo Alto headquarters, emergency server purges were attempted, but federal agents executed a midnight search warrant, seizing physical hard drives, master encryption keys, and internal communication logs before the data could be destroyed. Ethan Drake resigned in disgrace as LearnVector filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company's market valuation collapsed overnight from $4 billion to zero, leaving behind a disgraced executive team and thousands of compromised school districts struggling to scrub the software from millions of devices. Although LearnVector's servers were seized and its leadership brought down, the story does not end with a clean victory. The investigative trail exposed an unsettling, permanent reality of the modern digital age. During the 3 years LearnVector operated unchecked, over 60 petabytes of student biometric data, keystroke metrics, and emotional profiles were successfully transferred to offshore servers. Despite federal asset freezes, cybersecurity experts confirm that copies of the Vault 7 database remain active across decentralized private cloud networks. The children profiled by LearnVector are growing up, entering college, applying for loans, entering the job market, and seeking health insurance. Their baseline emotional stability scores, focus metrics, and stress profiles remain locked inside proprietary algorithms, quietly influencing automated decisions made about their lives by corporations they will never see. LearnVector was not an isolated anomaly. It was a proof of concept, showing how easily corporate surveillance can slip past guards when wrapped in the appealing promises of safety, efficiency, and artificial intelligence. The smart classroom promised to unlock human potential, but until we demand absolute transparency, the screens watching our children will continue to learn far more than they ever teach.